Je donne la parole à Monsieur Kennedy. Vous êtes justement un des représentants de Airlines for America. La parole est à vous. Allez-y.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. My name is Sean Kennedy. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Government Affairs for Airlines for America. A4A is the leading trade association representing U.S.-based passenger and cargo airlines. Our members carry about 90% of passenger and cargo volume, and our members include carriers such as United Airlines, American, UPS, FedEx, and Atlas Air. Let me start off by expressing my appreciation for the opportunity to address this committee. I've worked in both houses of Congress as well as the White House under President Obama. I thought the reform of the healthcare system was a complicated task, but Brexit is on an entirely different level. You are taking on an incredibly complicated and comprehensive issue that's going to affect the United States, the EU, and the UK, which is the provision of transatlantic air service. It's interesting for me as an airline advocate because air service is something that's fairly easy to talk about. That's largely because everyone has used the product. Everyone knows how it touches them. My father was 27 when he took his first flight in the 1960s. I was 5 when I took my first flight in the 1970s. And my children were born in the 2000s and each took travel within months of their birth. We've reached the point where it's sort of akin to mobile telephone service. Initially something that was a luxury, but now something that's taken for granted and woven into our culture. Every day there are 377 flights from the United States destined for the EU 27. They're carrying 76,000 passengers every single day. About 20% of those reach the EU with a stopover in Heathrow. In fact, nearly 53% of all traffic in Heathrow transits onto the EU 27. So we really cannot underscore enough the importance of Heathrow to global and European connectivity. Air services are exchanged globally through a system of bilateral and multilateral international aviation agreements, without which airlines would not have the legal authority to operate. The system for aviation rights has for decades now been the status quo. In light of the system, as has been stated, governments have historically carved out air travel from trade agreements. Air services between the U.S. and the EU are based on the 2007 U.S.-EU Open Skies Agreement, which celebrates its 10-year anniversary this week, which liberalized the transatlantic aviation market, meaning no restrictions on the flights, capacity, pricing, or market entrance between the U.S. and Europe. This agreement provides the legal foundation for airline alliances, such as Star, SkyTeam, One World, which include major European airlines such as BA, Lufthansa, Air France, and KLM. The vast majority of flyers are on one of these alliances, either directly from the U.S. to continental Europe or directly to the countries themselves. Airlines within an alliance coordinate with government approval on routes, schedules, and capacity. This yields more frequent flights with better connections and better timed and spread throughout the day. Competition between alliances keeps fares low for travelers. As has been said before, when the UK leaves the EU in March of 2019, they'll no longer be part of the Open Skies Agreement or the single aviation market. So on the first day of Brexit, US passengers will no longer have the ability to fly to the UK or fly to the UK to the EU 27. And the same will hold true for European airlines. It's been said by others here that other industries, automotive, telecom, have fallback positions with the WTO. They can continue to operate even in the absence of a trade agreement. We cannot implore you enough to bear in mind that aviation simply does not. Air services are specifically carved out of the WTO. There are bilaterals that go back to the 40s and 50s and 60s. Air travel was very different in that era, as some of you may recall. That is an era where telephones were tethered onto walls. There were no CD players. It was a business model that simply did not have the kind of robust maturity that we have right now. It's not what people have come to expect. You also have the US-EU Open Skies Agreement facilitated transatlantic airline alliances, which offer greater connectivity at lower cost. But government approval of these alliances hinges on a fully open transatlantic market, one that ends on day one of Brexit. Another complication that's been noted is that airlines generally sell tickets 1 year in advance. So airlines and passengers need assurances that they can book with confidence starting in March of 2018. Some suggested that U.S. airlines simply relocate their hubs to other points outside of Heathrow onto the continent. Makes sense, but it's impossible to implement. U.S. airlines have invested billions of dollars into the facilities at Heathrow. Of the top 10 transatlantic markets between the U.S. and Europe, Heathrow represents 8 of them. It is simply not a tenable option for us right now. So where does that leave us? Earlier I noted that travel has become as ubiquitous as mobile phone service. I suspect that most of your constituents assume that on day one of Brexit, they'll still be able to make a telephone call from their home country to the UK. They're going to expect the same thing when it comes to air travel. They're going to expect that on day one of Brexit, there won't be this kind of disruption. This begs for both the EU and the UK to take action now to provide legal certainty for your constituents. There's 2 steps needed to maintain international connectivity between the US, the UK, and the EU. One is an open skies agreement between the US and the United Kingdom. A4A is advocating actively with both sides, and we believe there's a path forward on that. And the second, which obviously is more relevant to you, is some kind of agreement between the EU and the UK. This would lead to the continuation of an aviation market that allows for open competition and avoids unnecessary regulation of commercial decisions. We recognize you have a lot to do in a very short period of time in reaching agreement between governments and across industry sectors regarding Brexit, but a major disruption in airline service between the US, the UK, and the EU would simply wreak havoc for all sides. As you know, there's been increased discussion of a transitional arrangement to limit the immediate impact on member states on the exit of the UK from the European Union, while a future arrangement is being defined. These arrangements would be targeted at the industries most immediately disrupted by the process. Aviation falls squarely within those confines. We ask that you voice your support for aviation to be dealt with as a priority issue and has not become hostage to negotiating positions. U.S. airline industry appreciates your leadership in tackling the challenges posed by Brexit, and I appreciate you having me here today. Welcome your questions.